Get a job and stop being a leech, my father shouted in the middle of the family dinner, his voice bouncing off the polished walls of our childhood home like a verdict. My mother looked down at her plate of roast beef and peas, not saying a word. My older brother Derek smirked over his wine glass, while his wife Andrea blinked with mock concern. I didn't flinch. I just smiled, reached for my wine, and took a slow sip before speaking. Interesting, I said softly. I was going to say the same thing to all of you. Silence crashed over the table like a tidal wave. My father's face turned an unhealthy shade of red. Excuse me, he barked. I met his eyes and held them calm and steady. You heard me, I said, but maybe you'd rather I spell it out. For the last 10 years, I've been funding this family, quietly, consistently, without complaint. And yet here I am being called a leech. My brother scoffed. What are you even talking about? You're broke. You live in a tiny apartment and wear the same pair of shoes every time we see you. My smile widened. You mean the apartment I chose to rent under a different name to maintain privacy? Or the shoes I wear because I don't need to impress anyone who's already written me off? My father stood up, slamming his palm on the table. You're delusional. You dropped out of your law career. You have no husband, no home, no status. You're the embarrassment of this family. I slowly placed my wine glass back on the table, folded my hands, and looked at him. You know what's embarrassing? I said. A man who borrowed money from his daughter 5 times to pay off secret gambling debts. A son who forged her signature to get a business loan. A mother who transferred her credit card debt onto her daughter's name and called it a family favor. Andrea gasped. Derek froze. My mother's fork clattered against her plate. My father stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. What are you saying? He demanded. I leaned forward slightly, voice steady and low. I'm saying I know everything, every lie, every transaction, every manipulation. And I'm done playing the part you wrote for me. The room was still, the air charged with something electric and dangerous. Then I stood up calmly, gathering my purse. Dinner was delicious, I said. It always is when I pay for it. As I walked out, I didn't look back. Behind me, the cracks in the facade of our perfect family began to splinter. They thought I was weak. They thought I was dependent. They were wrong. I had been watching, I had been recording, and I was ready. The game had changed, and this time I was playing by my own rules. My name is Lydia Bennett. I'm 32 years old, single, no children, and if you ask my family, I'm a walking disappointment. I used to be a corporate lawyer at a prestigious firm in New York, someone my parents bragged about at dinner parties. That was before the accident, before I spent 7 months in recovery, lost mobility in my left leg for a year, and realized that everything I thought I was building my life around, status, success, external validation, meant nothing to the people I was doing it for. When I left the firm and moved to a modest apartment in a quiet town 3 hours away, my family assumed I had failed. They didn't ask questions. They didn't offer support. They simply rewrote the narrative: Lydia the dropout, Lydia the emotional wreck, Lydia the financial burden. I didn't correct them. I let them believe whatever made them feel superior. I dressed in thrift store clothes. I showed up to family events late and left early. I nodded and smiled when they made snide comments about my potential. What they didn't know was that I had quietly built a different kind of empire. During my recovery, I started consulting online for small legal teams, helping them navigate compliance and contract law. Word spread. By the second year, I had formed a small firm, remote, only discreet, and under a brand name that had nothing to do with me personally. Within 5 years, I had 10 contractors working for me and a client list that included 3 Fortune 500 companies. I generated 7 figures annually, but no one in my family knew. They didn't want to know. To them, I was a charity case, and that was exactly how I wanted it. Because while they were busy judging me, I was busy observing them. My father, a retired factory supervisor, kept up appearances by borrowing against the house and covering the payments with my help. Unbeknownst to him, I was the one paying off the second mortgage he secretly opened. My mother racked up tens of thousands in credit card debt and cried to me over the phone that she couldn't afford her prescriptions. I wired money. Derek, my golden boy brother, convinced me to co-sign a business loan to get back on his feet. He defaulted on it within 8 months. I paid off the bank to avoid legal scrutiny. All of it quietly. All of it logged. My life became a performance-modest apartment, old car, quiet wardrobe. I said little. I smiled a lot. I let them think I was drowning while I was in fact building a fortress. My physical recovery had been brutal, but it had taught me discipline and clarity. Emotional pain lasted longer. Watching my family slowly shift from support to pity to disdain carved holes in me I didn't know were possible. But those holes became entry points for something else resolve. I would never let them hurt me again. And I would never let them do to anyone else what they did to me. My name is Lydia Bennett. I am not fragile. I am not dependent. I am not theirs. I am mine. And I've been preparing for this reckoning for years. Growing up in the Bennett household was like living inside a glass house with mirrors that only reflected the image my parents wanted to see. From the outside, we looked like the perfect middle-class family. Inside, it was a quiet war zone of expectations, manipulations, and comparisons that chipped away at my self-worth year after year. My mother was the architect of emotional guilt, a woman who measured love in acts of service and silence. If I did the dishes without being asked, I was a good daughter. If I challenged her assumptions or had my own opinions, I was difficult. My father was a man of rigid beliefs. To him, a woman's worth was defined by how much she obeyed and how little she questioned. I learned early on that being smart only made you a target unless you used it to elevate the family name. My brother Derek, older by 3 years, was the golden boy. He played varsity football, scraped through college, with my parents paying every cent, and was praised like a genius for every mediocre achievement. When he married Andrea, a woman from a wealthy family who treated us like her charity project, my parents were elated. They had finally leveled up in the social food chain. I, on the other hand, was a utility. A convenient name to use on documents, a backup wallet, an emotional punching bag dressed up as a daughter. At 24, I helped my father out of a $15,000 gambling debt. He cried on the phone, told me it was just a one-time mistake. I drained my savings and wired the money. A year later, it was $20,000 more. My mother needed dental surgery and couldn't afford it. I paid without hesitation. Derek wanted to start a real estate investment company and needed someone with a good credit score to secure a loan. I co-signed. He defaulted within a year. The bank called me. My family didn't. Through it all, they never said thank you. They never acknowledged my sacrifices. If anything, they resented me more. My independence became a threat. When I moved out of state after the accident, they told the neighbors I'd run away from life. At every holiday dinner, the passive-aggressive comments came like clockwork. Still freelancing, huh? Must be nice to live without responsibility. Derek's thinking of buying a second house. You should ask him for advice. The truth was, I bought my first condo in cash under my LLC. I owned shares in 2 commercial buildings. But none of that fit their narrative, so I let it go. I played my part. Until the night everything changed. It was my father's 65th birthday. I hadn't wanted to go, but Andrea sent a group text inviting everyone and guilt-tripping me with the line, "Family first right." I arrived on time bearing a bottle of wine and a polite smile. The table was set beautifully, candles flickering, music humming softly in the background. Everyone was dressed to impress, talking about home renovations and upcoming vacations. When I was asked how work was going, I said, "Fine," and left it at that. Then in the middle of dinner, my father raised his glass and proposed a toast. To family, he said, even the ones who still haven't figured out what it means to be productive members of society. The dig was subtle but deliberate. I ignored it. But then he looked right at me and said it, "Get a job and stop being a leech." The room froze. Everyone waited for my reaction. And that was the moment I realized something deep and unshakable. They didn't just misunderstand me. They had never tried to understand me at all. They didn't know me. not who I had become, not who I had always been. And they didn't deserve the version of me they thought they had broken. That night, something in me snapped, not in anger, but in clarity. I saw each of them as they truly were: users, actors, people who loved the idea of family, only when it meant control. That dinner wasn't the start of my war. It was the moment I stopped pretending I wasn't already fighting one. After that dinner, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even vent to a friend. I went home, closed the door behind me, and sat at my desk for 5 straight hours. I pulled out the fireproof lockbox under my bed and started sorting through the records I had spent years collecting: bank transfers, loan agreements, credit card statements, emails, notarized letters, signed checks. I had kept everything. Every financial favor, every lie, every manipulation. I wasn't just a victim. I was a witness. And now I was going to become the judge. My life had looked small from the outside because I designed it that way. The one-bedroom apartment with mismatched furniture, an investment property I rented from my own holding company for $1 a month. The beat-up sedan paid in cash, insured under a decoy name. The freelancing, a cover for my remote firm that now operated in 3 states with a 7-figure annual income. I wasn't pretending to be poor. I was pretending to be invisible. That invisibility gave me power. It let me observe without interference. For years, I had watched my family treat me like an embarrassment. While they spent money, I gave them like it was their birthright. And while they laughed at me, I built something real. After the accident, when I was recovering in that hospital bed, unable to walk or eat solid food, I made a vow to myself: if I ever regained control of my life, I would use that control to protect myself from ever being used again. And I meant it. My firm specialized in corporate compliance and legal strategy. I had clients who trusted me with their entire structures. I had accounts diversified across industries and states. No one could trace them to Lydia Bennett unless they knew where to look. And my family never knew where to look. They never asked. They never cared. So I watched. And I recorded. My father's gambling habits were still active. I tracked the transactions tied to offshore betting platforms linked to his debit card. My mother had opened 3 department store credit cards using my social security number. I froze the accounts, placed fraud alerts, and saved the correspondence. Derek had added my name to one of his LLCs without permission to secure a business line of credit. I hired a private investigator to confirm it. Andrea used my name in a recommendation letter for a real estate investment grant. She forged my signature. I let it all happen. Not because I was weak, but because I needed to know the full extent of their entitlement. I wanted them to feel safe. I wanted them to believe I was still the scapegoat. Because when people feel safe, they get sloppy. And they had. I built a spreadsheet. I filed every document. I cataloged dates, names, amounts. I created a digital vault, password protected and stored offline. If anything ever happened to me, a lawyer had instructions to send that vault to law enforcement and 3 specific news outlets. But I wasn't planning to die. I was planning to win. I began preparing legal steps, quiet inquiries to old colleagues about reverse asset tracing, fiduciary abuse, financial fraud. I reactivated my bar license. I met with a financial crime consultant in Seattle under a pseudonym and paid in crypto. I was no longer hiding. I was staging. Every visit to my parents, every holiday dinner, I treated like reconnaissance. I noticed what they bought, how they talked, what lies they repeated. I smiled and nodded, but inside I was making a map, a roadmap of accountability. And when the time came, I would follow it step by step with the same precision I used to argue cases in court. This wasn't revenge, it was justice, and justice required patience. They thought I was a failure, but I had been quietly documenting their crimes for nearly 3 years. When the foundation cracked at that dinner, it wasn't the beginning of a meltdown. It was the sound of the trapdoor opening. They just hadn't realized they were standing on it yet. The invitation came in a group text, cheerful and superficial like always. Family dinner this Sunday at 6. Dad wants lasagna. Don't be late. Andrea signed it with a smiley face and a wine glass emoji. I responded with a thumbs up. I had already made my decision. this dinner wouldn't be like the others. It would be the last time they saw the version of me they thought they controlled. I arrived at 6 sharp, wearing my usual muted sweater and jeans, hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, no makeup. The house was bustling. My mother greeted me at the door with her usual passive-aggressive hug, just tight enough to be performative. "You look tired, Lydia," she said. "Still working those freelance gigs?" "Still surviving," I replied evenly. Derek gave me a nod from across the living room, barely looking up from his phone. My father was already at the dining table pouring himself whiskey. "Hope you brought an appetite," he said. Andrea made a salad. I took my seat at the end of the table. The dinner began like all the others, mundane chatter, humble brags, subtle digs. Derek talked about a potential investor who was interested in his startup. Andrea dropped hints about a planned trip to Cabo. My mother complained about her back pain and how hard it was to schedule physical therapy. No one asked about me. Not really, not like they cared. Halfway through the meal, my father set down his fork and looked straight at me. "You still not working a real job?" he asked. I met his eyes and said nothing. "I mean, enough's enough, Lydia. You're 32. You can't expect handouts your whole life." My mother gave a theatrical sigh. "We've tried to be patient with you," she added. "But at some point you need to take responsibility. We can't keep helping you forever." "Helping me?" I asked, voice calm. Derek snorted. "Come on, Lydia. You've been coasting for years. You haven't contributed anything since you quit law." "You're right," I said, reaching into my bag. "It's time I contributed something." I pulled out a small black envelope and placed it in the center of the table. "What's this?" Andrea asked, suspicious. "A gift," I replied. "Open it." My father grabbed it, tore it open, and pulled out a single flash drive. "What's this evidence?" I said. "Of every financial favor, loan, forgery, and lie this family has involved me in." They laughed at first. But then I reached for my phone and opened a folder on my screen. "Let's start with Dad," I said, clicking on a labeled tab. 5 separate gambling payments routed through overseas accounts, all tied to your personal bank account. I've got screenshots, timestamps, and betting site metadata. My father went pale. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" I tapped the screen. "Because I've also got notarized proof that I paid off the second mortgage you secretly opened under Mom's name. The one you told her was for house renovations." My mother's fork dropped. "What?" she whispered. "You said he lied," I said flatly. "And you covered for him by shifting credit card debt into my name. I've got the statements to prove it." Andrea stood up. Her face flushed. "This is insane." I turned to her. "You forged my signature on a grant application, Andrea. You used my credentials and my legal ID number to pretend I was advising your real estate group. That's fraud." Derek shoved his chair back. "Lydia, what are you trying to do? Tear the family apart?" "I'm not trying to do anything I said. I'm just showing you what you already did and giving you one last chance to come clean before I take it all to court." The room exploded with noise shouting denial, outrage. I sat still, letting them spiral. Finally, I stood up, calm as ever. "I suggest you each go home and review your last 5 years of behavior. You have 72 hours to make it right, repay what's owed, sign restitution letters, and apologize. After that, I press charges." My father banged the table. "You can't do this. You're part of this family." "Not anymore," I said. "You made sure of that." And with that, I walked out of the house. Behind me, I heard panic settle into their bones. For the first time in years, they realized they didn't know who I really was. And that was the point. Because I wasn't the quiet daughter anymore. I was the reckoning they never saw coming. It hadn't started as a plan for revenge. In the beginning, all I wanted was clarity. After the accident, lying in a hospital bed with a fractured spine and months of therapy ahead of me, I found myself replaying conversations with my family over and over. I realized that every gesture of concern had come with a condition, every offer of help with a side of guilt. I remember the day I received the hospital bill. It was astronomical. I had insurance, but not enough. I called my parents, hoping they might offer assistance. My mother sighed and said, "Lydia, we've done so much for you already. Maybe it's time you learn to manage your own problems." I hung up, trembling with shock. That night, I sold off some stock options I'd been holding and paid the bill myself. The next day, I created a folder on my laptop titled Bennett Archive. I didn't know what I was going to do with it, but I knew I had to start keeping track. Months passed. I watched from the sidelines as my brother's business began to falter. He called me frantic. "I just need your signature," he said. "It's nothing, just a formality." He promised to handle the rest. I signed. He defaulted. I paid the price. Again. That's when the strategy started taking shape. I realized they would keep coming. They would keep draining me, unless I stopped them. Not with emotion, not with begging, with evidence, cold, undeniable facts. So I documented everything, every phone call, every transfer. I saved voice messages, printed emails, hired a financial advisor to audit my family's usage of my name and finances. What began as protection slowly turned into preparation. One moment that stuck with me was from a holiday dinner 2 years ago. I had just finished a freelance project for a client in the tech industry and was quietly celebrating a major payout, 6 figures wired to my business account. No one in my family knew. At dinner, Andrea made a toast and joked to Derek, the real success of the family. "Some of us just coast, but he builds." Everyone laughed. My mother gave me that look again, the one that combined pity and superiority. I sat in silence, but inside I was smiling, because I had just bought a commercial building in cash that week, and none of them had any idea. That was the moment I realized the plan wasn't just about stopping them. It was about reminding myself who I was. I wasn't the broken girl they dismissed. I was a woman who had rebuilt her life from the ashes and done it smarter, stronger, and more intentionally than they could ever imagine. Every slight became a piece of the puzzle. Every lie they told built my case. I didn't need them to approve of me. I needed them to underestimate me. That was the only way this would work. And it did. Because by the time I walked out of that dinner with the flash drive on the table, I wasn't seeking their respect anymore. I was executing a plan 3 years in the making, and they never saw it coming. I gave them 72 hours. That was generous. I didn't expect them to apologize. I didn't expect restitution. I expected denial, panic, blame shifting, and that's exactly what I got. On the first day, Derek sent a text, "Lydia, we should talk. No lawyers, just family." I didn't respond. On the second day, my mother left a voicemail, her tone trembling between indignation and fear. "You misunderstood everything, sweetheart. We never meant to hurt you. Please don't destroy the family over a few mistakes." My father. Silence. I'd always known he would never admit anything. On the third day, I filed the paperwork. Through my own firm, my real firm, not the cover I'd used for years. I initiated civil claims for financial fraud, identity theft, and fiduciary misconduct. I didn't do it in anger. I did it with precision. A cease and desist letter went to Andrea for the forged real estate documents. A formal demand letter to Derek for repayment, along with notice of intent to sue if the amount wasn't returned within 30 days. A letter to my mother detailing the credit accounts opened under my name, accompanied by an affidavit signed by the fraud protection agency I'd worked with to lock the accounts. For my father, I submitted a confidential report to the state tax authority. Gambling funds routed through personal accounts, unreported income, and suspicious transactions across borders. I wasn't trying to ruin anyone's life. I was holding them accountable. And in doing so, I was reclaiming mine. My attorney, Lisa Monroe, was an old classmate from law school. She read the files I handed her with a raised brow. "You've been documenting this for years," she said. Why now? I looked her in the eye. Because they finally said it out loud. "They called me a leech," Lisa nodded. "This is airtight, Lydia. You've got dates, documents, patterns. If they don't settle, we'll win in court." The fallout came quickly. Andrea responded first through a lawyer. She denied the forgery but offered a private settlement. I declined. I wanted her name on record. Derek tried to stall. He called, texted, emailed. I ignored it all. Then he left a voicemail. "I messed up, okay? But we're family. Doesn't that mean anything?" It had. Once. Before he turned my generosity into leverage. Before he told people I couldn't hold down a job. Before he watched me pay off his debt and acted like it was my duty. My mother sent flowers. Then a handwritten letter. It began with "Dearest Lydia" and ended with "Please don't do this." I kept it. As evidence. The real storm came with my father. 2 weeks after the dinner, I was served with a countersuit. He claimed defamation and emotional distress. I laughed when I read it, because it was exactly what I expected. I forwarded it to Lisa, who filed a motion to dismiss and submitted a cross-complaint with full documentation. And then I went public. Not on social media, not in a tabloid. In a professional blog under my firm's name, I published a case study about financial abuse within families. I anonymized the names, but the details were unmistakable to anyone involved. The post went viral. Emails poured in, people thanking me, sharing their own stories, asking for help. I wasn't alone, and neither were they. When the media picked up the piece, a local station reached out for an interview. I declined, not because I was afraid, but because I wasn't done yet. The final step was the forensic audit. I hired a team to dig into every financial tie my name had been used for: credit lines, business loans, shared accounts. What they found was worse than I expected. My brother had tried to use my name on a second property. My father had named me as a co-investor in a retirement scheme I'd never heard of. My mother had forwarded my personal ID to a family friend who used it to open an online bank account. I had been entangled in a financial web I never consented to. But now every strand was exposed, every secret illuminated. And the best part, I had done it without raising my voice, without playing their game, without becoming what they accused me of being. I didn't destroy my family. I just stopped protecting them from the consequences of their choices. The court dates were set, the subpoenas sent. I knew they would try to settle. They would beg behind closed doors and posture in public. I was ready for all of it, because I wasn't that girl anymore. I wasn't the daughter who quietly paid bills and smiled through insults. I wasn't the sister who sacrificed her credit to preserve someone else's pride. I wasn't their safety net. I was the reckoning. And it had arrived. 2 weeks before the first hearing, Derek asked to meet in person. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a neutral cafe downtown, a place with glass walls and a quiet corner table where nothing could be misinterpreted. He arrived in a fitted suit, his usual swagger dulled by exhaustion. I could see the desperation beneath his carefully rehearsed expression. "You really went through with it," he said, shaking his head. "I didn't think you'd actually do it." "That was your first mistake," I replied. "Underestimating me." He looked down at his coffee, stirring it, even though it was black. "You're going to ruin us, Lydia." "No," I said, leaning forward. "You did that yourselves. I'm just shining a light on it." "I was desperate," he muttered. "The loan, the business, Andrea kept pushing me to grow faster." "I didn't mean to drag you into it." "You forged my signature," I said flatly. "You lied to a bank. You made me liable for your mess. And when I covered for you, you laughed behind my back." He winced. "You think I don't remember the dinner at Mom's house?" I continued. "When you joked I was unemployed while I was the one paying your bills. That wasn't fair," he said quickly. "We were just cruel," I finished. "You were cruel. All of you." He sat back silent. For a moment I saw the brother I used to love, the boy who helped me climb trees, who gave me his jacket in high school when I cried after a breakup. But that boy was long gone, replaced by a man who saw people in terms of what they could provide. "So what happens now?" he asked. "We go to court," I said. "You face what you did, and maybe, just maybe, you learn something from it." He didn't argue, just nodded, slowly stood up and left. The next confrontation came with my mother. She showed up at my apartment unannounced, holding a tin of cookies like it was a peace treaty. "I just want to talk," she said. I let her in. She sat on the edge of my couch like it might burn her. "We were just trying to help you," she said. "You were lost after the accident. We didn't know what to do." "So you opened credit cards in my name?" I asked. "Transferred debt to me. That's help." She flinched. "We were scared. Your father, he thought you were slipping away from us." "You never had me," I said. "You had control. And when I took it back, you called me a leech." Her eyes welled with tears, but I didn't reach for her. "You always had to be the strong one," she whispered, "even as a child." "And you made sure I stayed that way," I replied. "Because the moment I faltered, you exploited it." She didn't deny it, just sat there, eyes red, hands shaking. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "Not for what we did, but for what it cost you." I nodded. "That's a start. But apologies won't change what's coming." The last conversation was with my father. It wasn't a conversation at all. It was a courtroom corridor, cold and sterile, where he walked past me without a glance. No words, no eye contact. Just a man stripped of his certainty, facing consequences he never imagined possible. And I didn't chase him. I didn't need to. Because this time, he wasn't the one in control. I was. The first court hearing came and went. Andrea settled immediately, her lawyer negotiating a public apology and full restitution in exchange for avoiding fraud charges. Derek fought harder, but the evidence was overwhelming. After 2 hearings and 1 deposition, he signed a repayment agreement and withdrew his countersuit. My mother didn't show up to court. She sent a letter through her attorney expressing regret and a willingness to pay back the debt in monthly installments. My father, he refused everything. Refused to acknowledge wrongdoing. Refused to attend mediation. Refused to believe that I, the daughter he had dismissed for years, could bring down his carefully constructed world. And yet the tax investigation moved forward without my help. His silence only buried him deeper. By the end of the legal process, I had cleared my name from every forged document, reclaimed my credit score, and received written apologies from 2 of the 3 people who once mocked my existence. But that wasn't the real win. The real victory was internal. I sold the modest apartment I had used as my decoy home and moved into the condo I had owned in secret for years, a modern space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, filled with light and quiet. And no ghosts. I furnished it not for show, but for comfort. Real wood tables, linen curtains, soft leather chairs. No one knew the address. No one from the past had a key. For the first time in years, I slept without tension behind my eyes. I woke up without dread clawing at my chest. I rebuilt my wardrobe not with designer labels, but with things that made me feel like myself. Colors I loved, materials that felt strong. Pieces that whispered power instead of shouting for approval. I started mentoring young women through an anonymous platform. Women who had been financially abused by family, gaslighted into silence, manipulated into submission. I didn't tell them who I was. I didn't need to. I just offered tools, resources, and the kind of validation I had once longed for. My firm grew. I hired 2 new consultants and began offering workshops on financial autonomy and legal boundaries. We held quiet events with big impact gatherings for women to learn, connect, and protect themselves from the kind of betrayal I knew too well. One evening, after a long day of work, I stood on my balcony with a glass of wine and watched the city pulse below. I thought about the years I'd spent being small on purpose, the years I disguised power as weakness. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad. I wasn't even vindictive. I was something else entirely. Free. Not because they had changed, but because I no longer needed anything from them. Not love. Not recognition. Not permission. I had become the woman I once needed when I was drowning. Not perfect, but whole. A few weeks later, a card arrived in my office mailbox. No return address. Inside was a simple message. "You were right. I'm sorry. Mom." I didn't cry. I didn't frame it. I didn't write back. I folded the card, placed it in a drawer labeled past, and moved on. Because my story wasn't about her anymore. It wasn't about any of them. It was mine. Fully. Finally. Fiercely. And I would write every next chapter as the woman who refused to be defined by anyone but herself. It's strange, isn't it? The way people treat you when they think you have nothing to offer. The way love becomes conditional. Family turns into a transaction. And your worth is measured by how much you can give until you give too much. Then suddenly you're a burden. You're inconvenient. You're a leech. That word stayed with me. Leech. It echoed in my mind long after the plates were cleared, after the voices stopped shouting, after the courtroom doors closed behind us. I kept thinking, if I was a leech, what did that make them? Parasites dressed as caretakers. thieves cloaked in concern, family in name but not in spirit. And yet I don't regret a single step I took. Not the silence, not the planning, not even the years of pretending, because every sacrifice was a lesson, every betrayal a blueprint, and every dismissal was a spark that eventually lit the fire of my awakening. I didn't seek revenge. I sought justice for myself, for every woman who has been called selfish for setting boundaries, for every daughter labeled difficult for saying no, for every sister, mother, aunt, or friend who chose herself and was punished for it. I learned something profound in those years of hiding and watching, that sometimes the most radical act of self-love is to stop saving people who never once tried to save you, to stop explaining your worth to those committed to misunderstanding it, to stop carrying the weight of a family that only reaches out when it's time to collect. So now I live quietly, intentionally, honestly. I no longer shrink myself to make others comfortable. I no longer lend more than I'm willing to lose. I no longer pretend that blood is thicker than betrayal. Instead, I surround myself with people who see me, not what I can do for them, but who I am when I have nothing to offer but truth. That's enough, more than enough. And as I sit here telling you this story, I wonder about you. Have you ever been made to feel like you were less because you finally said no? Have you ever watched the people who claim to love you reveal who they truly were the moment you stopped giving? If you have, I want you to know this. You're not alone. You're not wrong. And you're not weak. You're just someone who decided their peace was worth more than their silence. So tell me, if you were in my shoes, if your family turned on you, used, you dismissed you, what would you have done? Would you have walked away, or would you have done what I did? Stayed silent long enough for the truth to speak louder than any scream. Leave your thoughts below. I want to hear your story. Because stories like ours, they deserve to be told. They deserve to be believed. And most of all, they deserve to end with someone finally saying, I survived, and I am free.